When the local news reported that NASA's new telescope was having calibration issues, the gas station attendant stopped mid-pump and stared at the TV screen. The customer asked if he was interested in space stuff. "You could say that," he replied quietly, not mentioning that he designed the very system that was malfunctioning. Welcome to Interesting Human Stories. Before we dive into this incredible tale of brilliance, betrayal, and second chances, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe that genius can be found in the most unexpected places, hit that subscribe button. These stories reveal the extraordinary people hidden in plain sight. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's gas station cast harsh shadows across the cracked asphalt at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in September. The station sat at the corner of Route 9 and Miller Road, a lonely outpost serving late-night truckers, shift workers, and anyone unfortunate enough to run out of gas in the small town of Cedar Falls, New Mexico. Behind the counter, Dr. David Chen arranged lottery tickets with the same precision he'd once used to align million-dollar satellite components. At 54, he still carried himself with the posture of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, though few people in Cedar Falls would have guessed it from his current circumstances. The name tag pinned to his blue Murphy's polo shirt read Dave, a deliberate simplification of the name that had once appeared on patents for 3 different Mars rover systems, 2 satellite navigation protocols, and a revolutionary telescope calibration system that was, according to the news report currently playing on the small TV mounted above the coffee machine, experiencing unexpected technical difficulties. "Dave, you watching this space stuff again?" asked Jerry Martinez, a regular customer who drove an 18-wheeler for a living and stopped by every Tuesday night for coffee and cigarettes. "You're like obsessed with NASA or something." David glanced up at the screen, where a news anchor was explaining that the James Webb Space Telescope's successor, the Advanced Deep Space Observatory, was having problems with its primary mirror alignment system. The $12 billion instrument, launched just 6 months earlier, was supposed to revolutionize humanity's understanding of the universe. Instead, it was producing blurred images that had scientists baffled. "Just curious about how things work," David replied, ringing up Jerry's purchases without taking his eyes off the screen. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very system that was malfunctioning, the adaptive mirror calibration protocol, was his design. He'd spent 3 years developing it at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, solving problems that other engineers had declared impossible. The mathematics alone had taken 18 months to perfect, requiring him to essentially invent new computational methods for real-time mirror adjustment in the vacuum of space. Now he was watching his life's work fail on live television while selling lottery tickets and pumping gas for 12. David Chen hadn't always worked at a gas station in rural New Mexico. For 15 years, he'd been one of NASA's most brilliant optical engineers, specializing in space-based telescopes and deep space observation systems. His colleagues had called him a visionary, someone who could see solutions to problems that others couldn't even properly define. The trajectory of his career had been meteoric from the start. Doctorate in aerospace engineering from MIT at age 26, immediately recruited by NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. By 30, he was leading design teams for next-generation space telescopes. By 35, he held 17 patents and had been featured on the cover of Scientific American. His specialization was in adaptive optics, the incredibly complex science of correcting atmospheric distortion and mechanical imperfections in real time to produce crystal-clear images from space-based telescopes. It was work that required not just engineering expertise, but an almost intuitive understanding of physics, mathematics, and the behavior of light itself. The Advanced Deep Space Observatory had been David's masterpiece, the culmination of everything he'd learned about space-based optics. The telescope's primary mirror was composed of 127 individual hexagonal segments, each one requiring precise positioning to within nanometers to function as a single, perfect reflective surface. The system David had designed could adjust each segment thousands of times per second, compensating for thermal expansion, gravitational effects, and the minute vibrations that occurred even in the vacuum of space. It should have been his legacy, the achievement that secured his place among the great names in space science. Instead, it had become the weapon used to destroy his career. The end had come without warning, delivered by 2 federal agents who arrived at David's office on a Thursday morning in March, 2 years earlier. They'd presented him with a warrant and informed him that he was under investigation for selling classified NASA technology to foreign governments. The evidence had been circumstantial but damning: encrypted communications with overseas contacts, unusual financial transactions, technical documents found on his personal computer that weren't supposed to leave NASA facilities, David's explanations that he'd been corresponding with international colleagues about published research, that the financial transactions were legitimate consulting fees from years earlier, that he'd been working on the documents at home with proper authorization, had fallen on deaf ears. The investigation had dragged on for 8 months while David was suspended from his position. No criminal charges were ever filed. The evidence was insufficient for prosecution, but the cloud of suspicion had been enough to end his career. NASA had quietly terminated his employment, and word had spread through the aerospace industry that Dr. David Chen was a security risk. No other space agency would hire him. Defense contractors wouldn't touch him. Universities that had once competed for his expertise suddenly had no openings for someone with his qualifications. At age 52, one of the country's leading experts in space-based optics found himself unemployable in his chosen field. The house in Maryland had been sold to pay legal bills. His wife, Dr. Sarah Chen, a successful cardiac surgeon, had divorced him 6 months after the investigation began, taking their 2 children and moving across the country. She'd claimed the stress was too much, but David suspected she'd never fully believed in his innocence. With nowhere else to go and no prospects in aerospace, David had packed his remaining belongings into his aging Honda Civic and driven west, eventually running out of money and hope in Cedar Falls, New Mexico, where Murphy's gas station was the only place willing to hire a middle-aged man with an unexplainable gap in his employment history. Working at Murphy's gas station required skills that weren't taught in graduate school. David had to learn how to operate credit card machines, how to stock shelves, how to clean bathrooms, and how to deal with customers who ranged from polite to belligerent. The transition from designing systems that operated at the edge of human knowledge to asking paper or plastic had been brutal, but gradually David had found unexpected satisfaction in the simple reliability of his new work. Gas tanks were filled, windshields were cleaned, coffee was brewed, transactions were completed. There were no congressional oversight committees, no billion-dollar budgets, no international implications if something went wrong. Just honest work that served a basic human need. The night shift suited him. Cedar Falls was quiet after 10 p.m., giving him long stretches of time to think, to read, and sometimes to work on mathematical problems that no one would ever see. He'd developed a routine: handle customers, stock shelves, clean the station, and during the quiet hours, scribble equations on the back of receipt paper. The other employees at Murphy's treated him well enough. They could tell he was educated. His vocabulary and the way he explained things gave him away, but they attributed it to college rather than a distinguished career in rocket science. Dave's smart, they'd tell new employees, used to be a teacher or something. The regular customers had accepted him as part of the landscape. Jerry the trucker, who stopped by every Tuesday. Mrs. Henderson, who bought her morning coffee and newspaper at exactly 7:15 a.m. Tommy and his friends, college students who came in for energy drinks and snacks while discussing their engineering projects with the enthusiasm of youth. David listened to their conversations about school, about career plans, about dreams of working for NASA or SpaceX. He offered gentle encouragement and occasional technical clarification, but never revealed that he'd once held the kind of job they aspired to reach. The moment that changed everything came on a Thursday night in late September. David was restocking the beer cooler when the news report about the Advanced Deep Space Observatory caught his attention. The telescope. His telescope was experiencing severe calibration problems that had the entire astronomy community concerned. The mirror alignment system appears to be failing, the reporter was saying. NASA scientists are working around the clock to diagnose the problem, but officials admit they may need to consider the possibility that the $12 billion instrument is permanently damaged. David felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He'd experienced the same sensation during his darkest days at NASA, when complex problems seemed impossible to solve and the pressure of expectations felt overwhelming. But this was different. This was his system failing, and he was powerless to help. The customer at the counter, a woman in her 30s wearing scrubs from the local hospital, noticed his attention to the TV. "Terrible news, isn't it?" she said. "My husband's an astronomy professor at the university. He says this telescope was supposed to revolutionize our understanding of how galaxies form. Now it might all be wasted." David nodded, completing her transaction automatically. "These systems are incredibly complex," he said. "Sometimes problems develop that weren't anticipated during ground testing." "Are you interested in space science?" she asked, studying his face with curiosity. "You could say that," David replied, using the phrase that had become his standard deflection. But as the woman left and the next customer approached, his mind was already working on the problem he'd seen described in the news report. Over the following days, David found himself researching the telescope's problems during his break times and after his shifts ended.
The official NASA statements were carefully worded to avoid panic, but David could read between the lines. The adaptive mirror calibration protocol. His system was experiencing systematic failures that were getting worse over time. Using the station's ancient computer and his personal laptop, David accessed technical papers, news reports, and publicly available NASA documentation. The symptoms described in the reports painted a clear picture. The individual mirror segments were losing calibration faster than the system could correct them, creating a feedback loop that was gradually making the entire telescope unusable. David recognized the problem immediately. It was something he'd anticipated during the original design phase, a potential resonance effect between the calibration motors and the telescope's structural dynamics. He'd proposed a solution during development, a software modification that would dampen the resonance, but the change had been deemed unnecessary by the project management team. "The current system works perfectly in our simulations," the project manager had said during a review meeting 3 years earlier. "We can't justify the additional complexity and cost for a theoretical problem that may never occur." David had documented his concerns in the project files, but he hadn't pushed the issue. In hindsight, he realized he should have been more insistent. His desire to be a team player had overridden his engineering judgment. Now, watching his life's work fail on the national news every night, David found himself drafting solutions on receipt paper during the quiet hours at Murphy's. The mathematics were complex, but he'd solved similar problems before. The fix would require modifying the calibration software and uploading new parameters to the telescope's control systems, a relatively simple procedure that could be completed remotely. David's first instinct was to contact NASA directly, but he knew that was impossible. His security clearance had been revoked, his employment terminated, his reputation destroyed. Any communication from him would be automatically suspect, potentially making the situation worse rather than better. He considered reaching out to former colleagues, but most of them had distanced themselves during his investigation. The few who might still take his call would be risking their own careers by associating with him. In the paranoid world of government security clearances, even talking to someone under suspicion could be career suicide. For a week, David agonized over the situation. Every night, he watched the news reports grow more dire. Astronomers were publicly questioning whether the telescope could be saved. Congress was demanding investigations into how $12 billion could be wasted on a defective system. The administrator of NASA was facing calls for resignation, and through it all, David pumped gas and sold lottery tickets, knowing that he had the solution to save one of humanity's most important scientific instruments, but unable to share it with anyone who could act on it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Tommy Rodriguez, one of the college students who frequently stopped by the station for energy drinks. Tommy was a senior aerospace engineering major at New Mexico State University, and he'd been following the telescope story closely for a class project. "It's such a waste," Tommy said one night, shaking his head as he watched the latest news report. "My professor says the telescope's mirror system is basically unfixable without a space mission to repair it. But that would cost billions more and take years to plan." David looked up from the inventory sheet he was completing. "What makes your professor think it can't be fixed remotely?" Tommy pulled out his phone and showed David a technical article. "See, the problem is resonance in the calibration system. The mirrors are vibrating at frequencies that interfere with the adjustment mechanisms. It's like, imagine trying to tune a guitar while someone's shaking it." David read the article quickly, recognizing the symptoms he'd predicted years earlier. "Has anyone tried modifying the calibration software to account for the resonance?" "That's the thing," Tommy said excitedly. "My professor says it would require someone with deep knowledge of the original system design. The documentation isn't complete enough for current NASA engineers to risk making major software changes." An idea began forming in David's mind. What if someone did have that knowledge? How would they get it to NASA without going through official channels? Tommy considered the question. "I guess they'd have to find a way to get the information to someone who could present it credibly. Maybe a university researcher or a contractor who's currently working on the project." Over the next 3 days, David worked furiously during his off hours, developing a complete solution to the telescope's calibration problems. He wrote detailed technical specifications, created simulation models, and prepared step-by-step instructions for implementing the fix. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. By modifying the calibration algorithm to introduce controlled delays between adjustment cycles, the system could avoid the resonance frequencies that were causing the problems. The change required no hardware modifications, just a software update that could be uploaded to the telescope remotely. When he was satisfied with his work, David faced the challenge of getting it to someone who could act on it. After researching current NASA contractors and university partnerships, he identified Dr. Rebecca Foster, a professor at Caltech who was part of the telescope's science team and had the credibility to present technical suggestions to NASA. David created an anonymous email account and sent Dr. Foster a carefully worded message. Dr. Foster, I am a researcher who has been following the Advanced Deep Space Observatory calibration problems. I believe I have identified both the root cause and a solution. I am sharing this information anonymously due to institutional constraints, but I can verify my technical credentials if necessary. Please review the attached analysis and consider presenting these findings to the appropriate NASA personnel. He attached his technical documentation and sent the email at 3:17 a.m. on a Saturday, then returned to mopping the gas station floor and trying not to think about whether he'd just made a terrible mistake. Dr. Foster's response came 3 days later. Anonymous colleague, your analysis is extraordinary. The resonance theory perfectly explains the symptoms we've been observing, and your proposed solution is mathematically sound. However, I need to understand your background and credentials before I can present this to NASA. The stakes are too high for unverified information. Can we arrange a confidential discussion? David stared at the email for an hour before responding. Revealing his identity meant risking exposure, but the telescope's problems were worsening daily. News reports suggested that NASA was preparing to declare the mission a total loss. He arranged a phone call with Dr. Foster for the following evening, during his break at the gas station. At exactly 9 p.m., sitting in his Honda Civic in the parking lot of Murphy's, David dialed the number. This is Rebecca Foster. Dr. Foster, this is the person who sent you the telescope analysis. Before I identify myself, I need you to understand that my situation is complicated. I'm listening. David took a deep breath. My name is Dr. David Chen. I was the lead optical engineer for the Advanced Deep Space Observatory until 2 years ago, when I was terminated following a security investigation. There was a long pause. David Chen, your name is on half the patents for this telescope. We wondered what happened to you. What happened was a false accusation that destroyed my career. But that's not important right now. What matters is saving the telescope. Are you certain your solution will work? I designed the original system. I predicted this exact problem during development and proposed the same solution I've sent you. It was rejected as unnecessary complexity. Dr. Foster was quiet for almost a minute. David, if you're right about this, you could save the most important scientific instrument ever built. But if I present your solution and it fails, both of our careers will be over. Dr. Foster, my career is already over. I'm calling you from a gas station in New Mexico, where I work the night shift. I have nothing left to lose, but humanity has everything to gain. Dr. Foster presented David's solution to NASA's telescope team the following Monday, identifying him only as a former aerospace engineer with extensive knowledge of the system. The initial reaction was skeptical. Too many previous attempts at fixes had failed, but the mathematical analysis was compelling enough to warrant serious consideration. NASA's current engineering team spent a week reviewing David's work, running simulations, and checking calculations. Gradually, enthusiasm began to build. The solution was so elegant, so perfectly targeted to the specific problem, that it seemed almost obvious in retrospect. Whoever developed this understands our system better than we do, admitted Dr. James Patterson, NASA's current project manager for the telescope. The analysis identifies failure modes that we hadn't even considered. The decision to implement David's solution was made at the highest levels of NASA, with approval from the administrator himself. The software changes were uploaded to the telescope on a Thursday morning, with the entire astronomy community watching for results. David learned about the success not from Dr. Foster or NASA, but from the news report that played on Murphy's television at 11:30 p.m. In a stunning reversal, the anchor reported, NASA announces that the Advanced Deep Space Observatory is now functioning perfectly, producing the sharpest images ever captured of distant galaxies. Officials credit a breakthrough in understanding the telescope's calibration systems, though they declined to identify the source of the solution. David set down the coffee pot he'd been cleaning and stared at the screen, watching images of distant galaxies appear with crystalline clarity. His system was working exactly as he'd designed it to work. His life's work was saving humanity's understanding of the universe. Jerry Martinez, making his usual Tuesday night stop, noticed David's attention to the television. "Good news about that space telescope, huh, Dave? Guess those NASA guys finally figured it out." "Yeah," David replied quietly. "I guess they did." Dr. Foster had tried to maintain David's anonymity, but word began to leak within the aerospace community that the telescope's salvation had come from an unexpected source. When reporters started investigating the story, David's name inevitably surfaced. The first article appeared in Aviation Week, with the headline, "Disgraced Engineer's Solution Saves $12 Billion Telescope." The piece was factual but sensationalized, focusing more on the drama of David's fall and redemption than on the technical achievement. Within days, the story had spread to mainstream media. NASA, initially reluctant to comment, finally acknowledged that Dr. David Chen had provided crucial assistance in resolving the telescope's problems. The administrator issued a carefully worded statement praising all contributors to this successful resolution. The attention was both gratifying and overwhelming for David. Reporters called Murphy's gas station, asking to interview the genius mechanic who saved NASA's telescope. Scientific journals requested technical papers. Universities that had previously ignored him began reaching out with job offers. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source, a handwritten letter that arrived at the gas station, addressed to Dr. David Chen, Sacco Murphy's gas station. Chen, the letter read, "You don't know me, but I'm a graduate student in astronomy at the University of Chicago. I wanted to thank you for saving the telescope. My research depends on the data it collects, and without your solution, years of work would have been lost. I hope you know that your contribution will help advance human knowledge for generations to come."
The letter was signed by Maria Santos and included a photograph of a distant galaxy captured by the telescope, an image that would have been impossible without David's calibration system. The job offers that followed the media attention were tempting. NASA hadn't officially approached him. The security concerns remained unresolved, but private aerospace companies and universities were eager to hire someone with his expertise and proven track record of problem-solving. The most attractive offer came from SpaceX, which was developing its own deep space observation systems. The position would have restored David's career, returned him to the cutting edge of aerospace engineering, and provided financial security he hadn't known since leaving NASA. David considered the offer seriously, but ultimately declined. He'd found something at Murphy's gas station that he'd never experienced during his years as a high-profile engineer: peace, simplicity, and the satisfaction of honest work without political complications or security investigations. "I appreciate the offer," David told the SpaceX recruiter during a phone call from the gas station's back office, "but I'm exactly where I need to be right now." The recruiter was incredulous. "Dr. Chen, with all due respect, you're working at a gas station. We're offering you the chance to design systems for Mars exploration. This could be your opportunity to clear your name and restore your reputation." "My reputation was restored when the telescope started working," David replied. "As for clearing my name, I've learned that the opinions of people who judged me without evidence aren't worth worrying about." After ending the call, David returned to the front counter where Tommy Rodriguez was waiting with his usual evening energy drink purchase. "Hey Dave, I saw you on the news," Tommy said excitedly. "You're famous. My professor says you're some kind of genius who saved that space telescope." David rang up the energy drink and smiled. "Just solved a problem that needed solving. How's your senior project coming along?" "Actually, I was hoping you could help me with some calculations. It's about orbital mechanics, and my professor said you might know something about that." David pulled out a piece of receipt paper and a pen. "Sure, let's take a look." Dr. David Chen still works the night shift at Murphy's gas station in Cedar Falls, New Mexico. The Advanced Deep Space Observatory continues to function perfectly, sending back images that have revolutionized astronomy and earned David quiet recognition among scientists worldwide. He receives occasional speaking invitations, which he politely declines. Publishers have approached him about writing a book about his experiences, but he's not interested in rehashing the past. NASA has never officially cleared his name, but the success of his telescope solution speaks louder than any formal vindication. What has changed is David's role in the community. Tommy Rodriguez and his engineering classmates regularly stop by the gas station for informal tutoring sessions. David has become known as the person to consult when local students need help with math or science problems. The irony is that David may be having more impact on the next generation of engineers and scientists than he ever did during his NASA career. The young people he mentors don't care about security clearances or congressional investigations. They care about learning from someone who understands how the universe works and can explain complex concepts with patience and clarity. On clear nights, when business is slow, David sometimes steps outside Murphy's gas station and looks up at the stars. Somewhere among them, a telescope he designed is capturing light that has traveled billions of years to reach Earth, helping humanity understand its place in the cosmos. He thinks about the students he's tutored, some of whom will go on to work for NASA or SpaceX or other organizations that push the boundaries of human knowledge. In teaching them, in sharing what he's learned through both success and failure, David has found a purpose that's more fulfilling than any individual achievement. The man who once designed systems to explore the universe has discovered that the most important exploration happens in the minds of young people who still believe that any problem can be solved if you approach it with enough curiosity, persistence, and humility. Dr. David Chen may have lost his official title, his security clearance, and his prestigious career, but he's gained something more valuable: the knowledge that true contribution to human progress doesn't require recognition or fame. Sometimes the most important work happens quietly, in the spaces between more visible achievements, carried out by people who understand that the greatest discoveries often come from those who've learned that failure is just another form of data. From the night shift at Murphy's gas station, David continues to help humanity reach for the stars, one student, one problem, one moment of understanding at a time. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone whose current job completely obscured their incredible past? Someone whose quiet wisdom came from experiences you never could have guessed? Someone who chose simple purpose over complex recognition? Share their story in the comments. Tell us about the hidden brilliance in your own community. Because here at Interesting Human Stories, we believe that genius isn't defined by job titles or paychecks. It's defined by the willingness to solve problems, share knowledge, and serve others, regardless of who's watching or keeping score. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it. Help us honor the people who continue contributing to human progress long after the spotlight has moved on, the former stars who've become everyday heroes, one small act of service at a time. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember, the person behind the counter at your local gas station, restaurant, or store might have knowledge that could change the world. All they need is someone curious enough to ask the right questions.